Hello everybody. Thank you for selecting this video. I hope you will enjoy the subject that I have presented to you today. A next version of converting a global into a JSON object. The speciality in this case, it is written using, for a wide range, embedded Python, and as a side effect, I escaped the size limit for strings with 3.4 megabyte. The idea is rather simple. Instead of writing to a dynamic object, which is a string, in fact, just by writing it to a file. Just to remind you what we are doing, this is the structure of a global, and what I use is the same strategy as we have used for the efficient conversion. So only the nodes containing data are really put into the JSON object, not these empty structural nodes that are in between. The global I use for this example and also embedded into the package is still the same as before. We have a top level, we have typical record levels embedded in list blocks. We have also manually added a few JSON objects, and not just a one-to level, but also manually added levels for more structures with strings contents, with numeric contents. So it's the same as before. So this is the running version of all these examples. And here you see how the JSON object is stored into the external file. Could be an internal stream as well, but using embedded Python it was a little bit easier to write to an external file, and therefore I have used this. You have the global, the top level of the JSON object, and then an array for all the nodes. And if you remember the previous presentation, you see this is the way I named the efficient storage, since you have in a node reference and you have a value, and there is no overhead, well, except for escaping characters and other stuff. So this is the way it works. And of course, if you store it that way, there is the related loader that brings it back and recreates it after you have deleted it. Now I want to talk a little bit about the structure of my model class. There is a core class to create the JSON object, and you see this part is still written in ObjectScript, but you have all the callouts into Python exactly at these points, and looping over the global is running by a $query operation, as you see here. Honestly, I tried to do it with embedded Python, but it was so clumsy. I said, okay, this is not really the key exercise to read a global. This is really better done using ObjectScript. But once I have the reference and I have the value, I place it into embedded Python class, and this one writes it out to the file. So we have an init file, we have the top level that requires extra handling, we have the normal handling of the other existing nodes that we write out. And at the end, it is done, which means I have to close the file and the whole story is over. So how do these embedded Python methods look like? You have an open file. I create an envelope plus start to have the JSON array. I have the core module that writes out, that first creates a JSON object, then adds the node, adds the value. So each item is a separated JSON object, and then inserts it into the JSON, into the envelope object. And once we're done, we close the envelope and we close the file, and everything is done and out. So now, as we have created the file, we also need an import function. It's this Python function load. It runs by standard operation over this input file. You open the envelope that's recognized by this first structure. Then you create an JSON object that you have imported, and from the JSON object you have the node, you have the value. And there is a special case if the value is a list build block. It is necessary to transform it, and as this is really complicated to do in embedded Python, I just took the way to jump out to ObjectScript, which is splendid, suited to write list build blocks to a global, as you may know from history. And it's all that you have to. You pass the global, you pass the value, and you write it, and it's done. So, but you also have the option for strings, for numerics, to write to the global directly without jumping out to ObjectScript. So I create a global reference element in Python, and to write to a global you have the global name, the global reference, and you have the subscripts, and the subscripts are presented here as list elements. So I have to transform my typical subscript structure as written to the object into a Python list. Okay, and once you have it, you can have your global reference, you have your subscript list, and you write your subscript. The special case is if you have no subscripts, which is the case at the top level, where your value is a null string. But a null string is not allowed as a list. So you have explicitly to write none to say, okay, I want to touch the top level. That's the only special case that you have to cover here. Well, and then you run to the loop, and if you reach the last line, you get the end of the envelope, you are done, you close the file, you return, and everything is fine. Okay, this was the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was interesting to you, and I hope you will see me again with my next video on this channel. Goodbye.